Hey, so welcome. This is the first kind of podcast I've done with a guest, and I'm really happy to say that joining me today is Tal Hagin, who is a disinformation researcher, and you may have seen his work on X particularly. He's also got a Telegram channel. I'll put the links for both of those up. But Tal's just going to talk to me about his work as a disinformation debunker. I think what's brilliant about Tal is it could be so easy for him to be that guy from the meme who just goes actually and just gets in there and gets in people's faces and drags people down. But the way he debunks disinformation is in a really neutral, really sort of kind of really polite way. He just pops up, points out the error, and then moves on. And he does it both sides as well. So there's so much bias out there. I've been really clear about which side I think is in the right when it comes to Gaza and but that doesn't really matter to Tal's work because he's kind of in the pursuit of objective truth, which I think is absolutely commendable. And I don't have it in me to be quite as neutral as he is, but he does a fine job. So Tal, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
No worries. And I think the first question I've got for you, you can talk as much or as little as you like about it, but is how did where did your interest in disinformation come from? What inspired you to start all this?
Well, growing up in Israel, you're surrounded by conflict constantly going on around you. And when I was around 15 years old, there was Operation Protective Edge, the Gaza War of 2014, and I wanted to understand what was happening on the ground and what was really going on. So I ended up joining a lot of the more pro-Israel groups out there. That it just kind of became a natural trend, and it was my way to kind of enter that world of politics from a way where I could do something, make pro-Israel messaging and discuss the conflict from our perspective as a young teenager. And I did that for a while, but then I found that as activists, when you're very like as a pro-Israel activist or a pro-Palestinian activist, a lot of the discussions are quite shallow. What you're essentially, you'll talk about specific instances that have happened. You'll say, look at this horrific event that's occurred, but you're not really discussing the bigger questions or the meat of the discussion. And of course, those, uh, piece by piece discussions are important, but it's not really what I wanted to focus on. So I decided that I should just leave the more that type of activism work behind, and it's not really what I wanted to focus on. And I started looking at it from the perspective of media literacy. I was told do your own research. It was something that was very much hammered into me. But when these different groups were talking to me, or you could say educating me or indoctrinating me or whatever term you want to use, I found that I was just being told information. I wasn't really learning what it meant. What is international law? What is the history of Israel, not just from history books, but from different perspectives on the region. What is Palestinian nationalism? What is Palestinian identity or Israeli identity? And so I started trying to look into this myself, and I found that research is actually really difficult to do. We say do your own research, but most people think that just means going to Google and putting in, why did Israel kill these many people, or why did Palestinians kill these many people? And then you get, the first five results, and that's the truth. But that's not research. And research means time and effort. And so I started building lectures and trying to educate people on what my findings and what's the best way in order for us to educate others. Because something that has led me ever since I made that change and more focused on media literacy and disinformation was that I truly believe that a big factor in us not being able to understand one another with regarding anything that's going on in the current region with the Gaza war or Israeli society or Palestinian society or greater politics around the world is that we are all basing our opinions on whatever we've seen, what is presented to us. We filter certain information, we have certain bubbles of information that we perceive as true and real, and that can be completely different than you.
Hmm.
And so if you believe that if you mix, I'm just making this up, if you believe that if you mix blue and yellow uh, equals purple, and I believe that blue and yellow equals green, then there's no discussion. Both of us have to look at the colors. We need to learn color theory. And then once we understand how those colors actually combine with one another, we can come to an agreement. And so this is a very small in perspective. And of course, you have your religious beliefs, You have your ideologies that are also built off of your family, your traditions, and there's always going to be sectors of society that you will never be able to reach. And I think that's something important to realize, that doesn't matter if we all have the exact same information. At the end of the day, if I see myself as a capitalist or a communist or a Zionist or as anti-Zionist, sometimes this is simply rooted in belief systems that cannot be swayed by having a conversation with others, and that's fine in my opinion. But I think that the majority of our arguments that we have with one another are based on misinformation, and that's what I focus on trying to do with the public.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the scariest phrases of modern times is I've done my own research. And as someone who's done a bit of academia on both, the art side, the humanity side, as well as the science side, there's very different approaches to it, but there's kind of themes that you can pull out across it, like corroboration of sources, understanding who your source is, understanding, being able to say the good and the bad of whatever you're reading, and having the knowledge base to actually be able to do that. And as you say, just doing that through a Google search just doesn't work at all. It's a really dangerous thing. And I really liked what you're saying about the worldview piece, because that's a really well-established theory in psychology, is irreconcilable worldviews, where everything that goes into making you a person is going to influence how you see the world. Family background, religion, education, you name it. It's all going to go into that worldview, and it's going to make you see the world a certain way, and that presents real challenges. Um, so when it comes to the current Gaza conflict, you know, obviously there's such a sea of disinformation and misinformation out there. And I think we could probably start by defining the difference between the two, or I'll let you do it, of course. So if you want to go and let's get some terminology straight before we go into more detail.
Yeah, so it's important to understand the differences because one is something that we are all at fault of doing once in a while, and the other is a lot more problematic and it's much harder to fight against. So, misinformation is something that we all do. Essentially, it is when we accidentally share information that is false. We don't mean to do it. Maybe, for example, we read a report and we interpreted it wrongly, and then we put out that report. That is misinformation. It's when you accidentally spread information that is false, but you're not doing it on purpose. Disinformation is when you're spreading manipulated information on purpose. You're trying to poison the well, so to speak. You're trying to harm the other side by spreading disinformation that isn't true, and you're aware that it isn't true. Sometimes these can mix and mash. For example, I might debunk a person who has posted an edited video. For example, in the past, I've debunked a video of an IDF soldier seemingly exploding in his tank, but I found out that actually the explosion is from a sample from YouTube, and that they were simply cut together. So the person that uploaded that video that I debunked, maybe he wasn't spreading disinformation. Maybe he saw that video on a Telegram channel and they were spreading disinformation, and he was just spreading misinformation because he wasn't aware that it was fake. And so one of the big issues is that while we all fall for misinformation, disinformation is really what is the driving factor behind a lot of the information that we see online that is false. And sometimes it can be very, very difficult to know if it's disinformation or not, because that requires intent a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And unless we can find the primary source of the uploader, which isn't always easy, it's hard for us to know whether or not there's that intent. And also, if I say that you spread disinformation, they could say, well, I just did it by accident. I didn't do it on purpose.
Yes, it's the difference between murder and manslaughter, isn't it? It's that intent. It's that intent
Exactly.
to it. Um, and do you keep any records of, the scale of the stuff that you're coming across? I know we've both spoken to Cyabra and looked at the crazy scale of bots and fake accounts and that kinds of things. Are there any patterns or themes that you've been pulling out over the last few months that are starting to build a picture?
So I have, of course, on a personal note, I see the certain types of accounts that I end up debunking a lot more. There is certain accounts that tend to post more misinformation more often, which could be interpreted as disinformation. The reason I personally don't keep really a record of that and also share it with my followers or the people who view my content is because I'm aware of the fact that my algorithm and what appears on my page can be very much influenced by who I follow. And sometimes, for example, I'll debunk a pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian post one day, and then all of my next feed will just be pro-Israel content or pro-Palestinian content. So suddenly, all I'm debunking is pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian content, and so suddenly it looks like I'm only debunking one side. I'm also a researcher for an organization called Fake Reporter, and they actually do handle this type of stuff with looking at disinformation campaigns, bot networks. So that's something that I would advise people to look up fake reporting and look at what the actual organization does. But personally, it's not something that I do on my
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you to reveal trade secrets, so tell me to wind my neck
time.
with this question, but how do you do it? How do you, when something comes across your social media feed on whatever platform, how do you go, hey, that's got to be wrong. I'm going to look into this. What sort of triggers are you looking for?
So there is a thing of precedence. So because I've been in this work or been involved in this situation, either from the point of view as an activist or someone just looking to learn or a researcher over the years, I've seen a lot of the content repeats itself, and so a lot of the times when I see certain pieces of content, I remember them from like 5, 6, 7 years ago, and so I know that they're automatically fake. There's also precedent that, for example, in this conflict, we've seen a lot of images of children or people who have been killed or injured from other conflicts being used. So
Mm.
I'm more likely if I see an image of somebody that looks a little bit off, and I can't explain what looks off to me, it's just intuitive that I see something that looks a little bit strange, then I'll look into it. 90% of the times when I analyze a photo that might be from a different conflict, it's not, and it actually is from the current conflict. And once in a while, when I find something that is false, I do debunk it. But it's based on precedent and also signs. So something that I would also advise everyone to do is that when you view content and you just want to quickly know if something's off, try to find unique identifiers in the video. For example, if you see a video that's saying, here's an example of the Americans firing a missile from Alaska, and you don't see any snow in the background of the video, and it looks like it's a desert, then most likely it's misinformation. It has nothing to do. So stuff like that, where you see a patch on the uniform and it doesn't make sense to you. So also the more time you do this and the more information that you build up in terms of your knowledge, you suddenly start to notice these patterns. And so I think the third aspect of this is having a niche. So I think that a mistake that a lot of people do when they become experts or they become very well versed in a certain topic is they start to spread out because if you're really good at analyzing this topic, you must be good at analyzing everything else because a smart person can do everything because that's what it means to be smart. It means you're really knowledgeable, you know stuff. But that's not the case. And so, for example, my field of expertise, if you want to call it, or focus is Israeli, Palestinian militancy, the IDF, Israel, Palestine, more in the information sphere. And so, because I focus on a very niche topic, I know all of the information within that topic and what I should be looking for. But for example, when I did an analysis and I needed to identify a weapon that was showcased, I actually got it wrong because my
Mm.
background isn't in weapon identification, and I corrected that analysis. But that's, for example, my limitation there. I could start studying for a year different weapon identification, but at the end of the day, that was the limit of my knowledge on topics. And so it's precedent, it's little details that I notice, and it's also the knowing the ends of your knowledge, like where the ends of your knowledge are.
Yeah, and that's so tricky, isn't it? Because it takes a bit of humility. I get asked to comment on Ukraine quite frequently, and I'm not an Eastern European expert. My master's degree is on the Middle East, and so I can have a rough swag, but I know for a fact it's only going to be surface level. I'm never going to get the depth of someone like Justin Bronx or Rob Lee or anyone like that. So I'll sometimes say yes if I think it's a news channel that's not going to go too deep, but I'll never try and pretend to be an expert in that area. Yeah. So when you're stumbling across these things, I think one of the things I notice is they seem very targeted towards emotional responses, and I think that's another really good trigger I'd probably draw out at this point. Yeah, I think asking yourself the question, like, why am I seeing this? Why has somebody put this on the internet? What's the effect they're trying to have on me by putting this on here? Do you ever come across, do you have any facility to look at deep fakes and things like that? Because I've seen a couple of videos just today, someone put on my timeline where there was definite blurring where I wouldn't expect to see blurring normally of details of injuries and things like that. And my AI alarm went off, or at least my terrible Photoshop alarm went off. Do you have the ability to look at stuff like that as well, or do you have can you point people towards where they might find
I think
warnings?
there are, yeah, so there are different types of tools that you can use to kind of look at the photo, whether or not it was manipulated in the background, if pixels have changed and something like that. Sometimes it's also looking at specific details. So when you look at a photo that potentially could be AI, try to look at very, very specific details, not just the hands, but sometimes the muscles in the face, like the little lines. For example, the photo in the back of Andrew with the fire and with the smoke. So does it look a little bit odd and out of place? Does it something not match? So stuff like that can kind of give you an indicator. But sometimes things look real, 100% real. And there
Mm.
have been deepfakes that have, you know, I had to like start. I remember there was a deepfake that was done where it was like not even a deepfake, it was an edited video where they did an interview between two different people who have never actually met. And even though the artist who actually created that deepfake said it was a deepfake, I needed to go and actually find the original interviews that were conducted that they took just to prove to myself that it actually was deepfake because of how well it was done. But
Mm.
funny enough, when you compared the real footage next to the fake one, it was very obvious that there was manipulation there, just in terms of them making the photos a lot more HD in the video and moving them out. But we are getting to a point, for example, where it's becoming harder and harder to know what is AI, and that is a real trouble that we're entering. For now, I wouldn't recommend any of these AI websites that detect AI. It's not that good. I've
Mm.
tested them with photos of myself, and sometimes if I, you know, bend my finger in a certain way, so it'll say that I'm AI, and sometimes it won't. So we also need to be careful with detectors. But there are photos that, for example, I can't prove without a doubt that they're AI, so I don't even touch them. So it is
Mm.
becoming more of a difficult field to handle.
Yeah, and I should probably add here that I've actually met you in person, so I know you're not AI, and this isn't just a talking computer head. Um,
I can vouch for Andrew as well.
yeah, so you know, when you've got the advantage of being an expert in this, you've been doing it since you were a teenager. You live and breathe this stuff. If you're someone's watching this and they're just a normal person that just wants to get on with social media and learn a bit about news and look at funny videos of dogs and not have to, be absolutely looking at every single thing they see on the internet and just thinking, oh, is this real or not? What advice would you give to people to help them spot this stuff when it comes over their screens?
This type of approach can feel very um, unemotional when I'm going to be putting it out there. So be aware of that. Is that you can't care about everything. At the end of the day, me living in Israel, this is the conflict that I focus on because this is what's important to me. Maybe as an American, you do care about this conflict because of your tax dollars, and the American government is involved in the region, and so it's important to you, and that's fine. But because there's so much going on all the time, try to think, is me investing into this conflict enough for me? If you're going to then go out to protest, if you're going to boycott, if you're going to donate, if you're going to do anything beyond simply looking and scrolling past, then try to know what you're looking at. Try to look into it a little deeper. You can reach out to verification experts who can try to help you know whether something's true or not. You can look at different guidelines on how to actually spot fakes. Essentially, the main thing that I would always say, of course, just pivoting a little bit here, is if you see a report that doesn't have a source, ignore it immediately. Don't even give it a second thought. If it has a source, look at the source. I can't tell you how many times I've seen posts where they say CNN as a source or BBC or Al Jazeera. And when you actually try to look up the source, it doesn't exist,
Mm.
or it said something completely different. Or sometimes the source is some anonymous person that no one knows whose exists, and so you need to be aware of that. And just kind of be aware of the content that you're viewing. And I would essentially say that, when I'm going online and I'm looking at TikToks or YouTube videos and I see a guy falling off a bike, I don't care if it's real or not. I'm just watching a funny video, or watching memes or stuff like this. It doesn't really matter to me if it's real or not because it doesn't affect how I'm going to live my life. But I personally, this conflict and the way it goes does affect my life personally. And so it's important for me to get the correct information and then build my opinions based on that type of information. So if the situation doesn't matter what it is, it could be the Ukraine and Russia, it could be what's happening in Sudan, in Syria, the crisis in your own country that's going on regarding living wages, regarding the economy, immigration, any of these different concerns, if it's something that's important enough for you that you want to do something about it, then look into it and start researching about it.
Yeah, and I think being aware of the fact that people try and manipulate you as well, I think is important. And I think that
Of
that going
course.
back to that question is like, why am I seeing this? Because we go back to your video of a guy falling off a bike, the hypothetical video. Nobody is going to see that and go, right, I'm going to go and march in London now for men falling off bikes. This has gone on too far. This has gone too far. The dog's kicking off. And I'm here for that, by the way. I'm not even editing that out. More dogs in blogs is something I'm here for. Um, and the difference between the bike video and seeing a dead child is that that dead child has been put on the internet because people want you to draw a conclusion from it. And from a military perspective, that's really challenging because, first of all, you don't know who was responsible. You don't know how it happened. You don't know when it happened. You don't know where it happened. There's so much you don't know about that video. And yet people, because it's such an emotional thing to see a dead child, of course it is, people jump to that emotional reaction straight away without all the information they need to make a rational decision about what they're seeing. And I think, not jumping to conclusions. And I've done it myself because we all do. We're all human, apart from professional disinformation researchers who are clearly superhuman. Um, we all jump to conclusions straight away and we're like, that's outrageous. This can't be allowed to happen. And then you have to just force yourself to go, okay, this is system one thinking, this is the quick instinctive stuff. I need to force myself into that slow, deliberate thinking and do that. And I nearly got by a Zelensky bit of disinformation the other day. It was a really, really well made deep fake that nearly had me. I retweeted it and I was like, actually, I need to check that because it doesn't seem right. And I checked it and it was false. And so, if you're not constantly aware and constantly watching, then you're going to get caught out. And
Yeah,
that's, if people get caught out, that's totally understandable. And hell, you've popped up in my replies a couple of times going, mate, that's wrong. And I'm grateful for it because I don't want to be deliberately spreading things that I know to be factually incorrect.
it's why I always say I always try to perceive people and them spreading. There are individuals who I'm very much well aware personally that they're spreading misinformation, but I will always treat them as people who are spreading misinformation because I find that if you're aggressive towards individuals, then they're much less likely to respond, and they'll also maybe misinterpret what you're trying to say. I think going back to the emotional response and talking about dead children, it can seem very trivial for me to, when people, for example, put out a message about what's happening in Gaza and they put a photo of a child who's been killed. And, I find out that this specific photo is actually from Syria, for example. And then sometimes the replies are like, why are you analyzing this? It's a horrific photo. And there is some understanding to that. At the end of the day, I'm kind of distancing myself emotionally, and it's not easy. It's I can't explain to you how many horrific images pop up on my timeline every time I scroll, and
Hmm.
to an extent, I become desensitized to it after the content I saw on October 7th, and then afterwards with the continuation of the war, already essentially numb to it to an extent, and that's
Hmm.
not a good thing that I'm able to see
Yeah.
these type of images and not react to it, but it helps me analyze them objectively and to understand where these images are coming from. And the reason it's important, a dead kid is a dead kid. But for example, let's just say you wanted to donate. So you see this child, this photo of a dead child, and it says it's from Gaza. And then you go to donate to one of the relief funds for children in Gaza. And then the next day, you find out that this child was in Syria. So now, instead of donating that money to the children in Gaza, you should have donated it to the kids in Syria. And so this can also vice versa, or how they were killed. So, for example, if we find out that the child was killed by the IDF, then you'll be going out and trying to boycott the IDF and shipping armaments. If you find out that it was killed by rocket fire from Hamas that fell back into Gaza, then you're going to be calling on Hamas. And so it's also where do you put your anger? Because you should be upset about this, but
Hmm.
it's also important to be accurate about who you're angry at. And this can be very trivial, maybe if you're just listening to this one on one. But I can promise you, by how I view content, something really bad can also happen out of this. So what I've noticed is that there are a lot of people who were very, very pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian activists for a very, very long time, and then suddenly they realized that a lot of the content that they were sharing was fake, or they always thought that X was true, but turns out it was Y in this specific case. And for some reason, I've seen this constantly where people just switch 100%. Suddenly, now they're completely pro-Palestinian, or now they're completely pro-Israel on the other side, and now they hate the other side. I see this all the time where people then feel betrayed that they kind of were believing all this misinformation, and so they suddenly switch and go the complete opposite way. And so it's important for me that when you're building up your belief system and you're building up this anger, I want to make sure that you're directing it at the right person. I don't care if that's towards the IDF, if that's towards Israel, if that's towards Hamas, the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank. to me, it doesn't matter as a researcher. What matters to me is that you're directing it at the right person.
Perfect, mate. That's really awesome. Thank you. Is there anything else before we sign off that you want to raise or talk about? I mean, I'll give you, it's over to you, mate. Anything you want to particularly bring up?
Something I think that's really important is that there are a lot of disinformation researchers or misinformation researchers like myself, but there are also those that focus on a specific topic. Like, for example, there are Twitter accounts, X accounts that focus specifically on pro-Palestinian propaganda,
Hmm.
and there are disinformation analysts that focus on pro-Israel um, propaganda, like fake content that each side focuses. And one of the biggest issue that arises from this is that it gives you a false sense that their side puts out disinformation or misinformation, and my side doesn't. Why? Because I don't see it on my timeline. I don't ever see these horrific images, the real ones. All I see is all the debunked images. I never see what's really happening. And this then gives you a false sense of security and allows you to start spreading misinformation because you think I could never fall for misinformation because my side doesn't do that. I can promise you right now, everybody spreads misinformation. I've spread misinformation on a few occasions. I try to like minimize it as much as possible, but there have been a few occasions where I got the location wrong. I got the group that I was mentioning wrong. I got the place of that the combat was happening wrong. These things happen. We all make mistakes. But it's important to try to make them as little as possible because when I make those mistakes, there are already thousands of people who looked at that tweet and believed what I said before I can make the correction. And so that's on me. That's something that I have to realize that I have a responsibility. But at the same time, you need to take responsibility and that before you put out a tweet, um, verify that it's true to the best of your abilities. The way that I try to operate on X and in general with my opinions, and I think that it's a bit of a radical approach, but I think that it really helps. Is imagine you would have to stand in court and defend your post that you made. Could you defend it? If I said, "What's your?" For example, you said there's this horrific video of this person being killed, and I said, "Can you show me that video?" And if you don't have the video on handy, then why are you spreading it? You can't actually share that video with me, so you never actually saw it. Or know what your sources are. If you say there were reports that the IDF attacked this site or Hamas killed this person, okay, based on what? What are you making those reports based on? Are you just saying reports? What does that mean? If you can't tell me where those reports are coming from, then why are you spreading it yourself? So I think it's about being able to defend yourself, and you can lose. Even if you have the best defense, you can lose in that defense. But you should be prepared to defend your beliefs, and that requires you to do the extra bit of research.
Yeah, and have that in your back pocket. Absolutely. And what I'm going to share at the end of this is a a sort of poster that I put together for my psychology masters, and it's just 7 principles. And it's verify before you trust. Always question the source. Beware emotional triggers. Look for evidence that supports or disproves. Check other reports to make sure you're corroborating what you're about to share. Look out for fakes and deep fakes, and then if in doubt, just don't spread it. That's I think those are 7 pretty decent rules to follow. So Tal, if someone's got something on social media that they've stumbled across and they want you to check it, is there a way they can ask you to have a look at it for them?
Yeah, the best way is just to my DMs, my direct messages on Twitter is always open. Feel free to message me directly, and I'll try to look at it. Of course, if I'm unable to prove that it's fake or real, then I'll say that to you. I'll tell you what my thoughts are, whether if I think it's believable and what I'm basing that on, and I'll try to the best of my abilities. And if you also need help with anything else, as advising with help or media literacy and trying to teach people around you, then feel free to reach out and we can discuss.
Fantastic. And I'll have your socials up on the screen and hopefully people will hit you up. Um, Tal, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, mate. That's a really useful half an hour and I hope people enjoyed it. But I look forward to hopefully getting you back on here at some point in the future and we can talk about something a bit different and go from there. But
Yeah,
hey, you have a great evening, my friends, and I'll speak to
sure.
you soon.
Awesome.